Well, it's last night. A police precinct is getting ready to shut down when it's suddenly attacked. That's the story of assault on Precinct 13, originally by John Carpenter and remade more recently in 2005. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hello.
Originally, I was going to talk about the idea of subverting expectations, but I think something that's kind of going on right now in the world is all this stuff with the coronavirus as we're recording this. And my thought was about how this is going to be changing the movie experience. Because right now, at least in the States, a lot of theaters have been shutting down. And I think for a long time, it's going to really impact things. And so I thought we could talk a little bit about, kind of growing up, how the movie-going experience was, and how it's evolved over the years, and then how it's going to change yet again, as we suspect.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in general terms, anything that involves large gathering of people has been diminishing over time. Yeah. We have movie theaters, malls, churches, all these things are gradually being sort of just fragmented into different kind of experiences, or we just simply don't do them anymore.
Right.
And I mean, the movie experience has been under pressure for a long time because home movie equipment is so good now.
Mm-hmm.
The asynchronous nature of releasing things on the web or online through different services means you don't have to go to a movie theater to watch anything anymore. Just fitting it in around people's ever increasingly busy schedules. So there's a lot of things like this that I think, we're already down this path of technology isolating people more. And that's kind of the asynchronous, personalized nature feels kind of, it feels more sort of individual to each person, which is kind of nice. But it also has this effect of sort of splitting us off from each other. And then when you've got something like the coronavirus, that means that people can't shake hands anymore. You're not really supposed to be within 10 feet of each other.
Right.
And now everyone's starting to work from home. Now next to go could be offices in general. There may be sort of things that, like, if productivity stays the same, maybe big companies say, okay, why are we paying all this rent when we already have cloud infrastructure? We can keep tabs on people with their mobile phones and their, VPNs and everything. So,
right.
This could be the big change for society, really.
I remember summers where, my mom would park, us kids in the movie theater, and there was like, maybe 75 cents. I know this kind of sounds ridiculous now and stuff, but it was like 75 cents for us to be there for like a double feature, a Disney, double feature with like, maybe Snow White, Seven Drawers, and like Escape from Witch Mountain, something like that. And we basically be there with a whole bunch of other kids, and that would be like kind of, our afternoon's entertainment. Basically, the movie was babysitting us more or less and stuff. I mean, there's more than one reason why, this just wouldn't happen nowadays, not least of which is like kind of, the current scares and stuff, but just even like kind of people's attitudes with kids' safety. And then also just like kind of, like I said, the movie experience has changed so much that like nowadays, more than likely, you'd be home, watching it on, Netflix or, maybe on your iPad or, other devices, stuff like that. And, like you also said, we've really shifted from this kind of group experience where that was kind of going to movies and stuff was something that you did with your friends and all that, to now we're very much like kind of, have either our entertainment center or our man cave and stuff, and just really, sequester ourselves, kind of into like these kind of individual nests, if you will, or individual cocoons of kind of social acceptability, social safety, I guess, is another thing. And I think the term itself, though, too, this social distancing, I think it really, I mean, even though that's the term we're now using for coronavirus, I think that's something that we've been doing for quite a while,
Absolutely.
Already and stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think it's the other thing is attention spans. I don't know. My kid, I don't know if she can. No, movies are a bit of a struggle. She's used to things like Captology optimized apps that will bling and make things flash up at the touch of a screen, and so you know, that's another issue as well.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we actually engineering these things? And there's this other sort of question of, marketing now is, you wonder how much of this, that used to be the case that if you wanted to sell a toy to a kid, you'd have to go through the parents, they'd have to watch the advert on TV, they'd then have to go watch, ask their parents for that toy. Now they can just market directly to them through an app, and they don't even just sell them anything. They don't even have to sell the toy anymore, just sell yet another app, and it just has to like lead onto it. And yeah, so anyway, that's another big discussion away from this. But
yeah, and that's kind of connected to the movie going experience too, because a lot of the monetization was through the concessions, was through popcorn sales and drinks and all that, and they still do make a considerable amount. But I saw a news thing, just like I think today even, that talked about how I think it's Universal, that they're kind of like, for some of these movie releases, because of how the theaters being shut down, they're going to go just go directly to streaming and stuff. And I think like that really won't affect too many things for the movie sales anyway. But for the theaters though, I mean, they're really, between these and then also like kind of even like another industry is going to be really hard hit is airlines right now. Like a lot of them are kind of basically canceling flights and all that. I think as we've seen, like you said before, with after 9/11, a lot of these airlines, they're going to go under. I mean, they're not going to be able to kind of withstand so long before that they can go without operating and stuff. So I think we're going to see a huge shift to some of these businesses.
Yeah, travel. I think any kind of communal things, because I mean, people haven't realized, that this could be the new normal. The things we're sort of experiencing now, we could get this every winter from now on. And then that's going to completely change the layout of society. We'll have to hermetically seal up our octogenarians until summertime. Then they will break out like a butterfly from a cocoon in the summer.
Right.
So I just don't know what else you're going to do with old people if this is like the new norm.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I tell you, like, just what kind of how this all ties into some degree to me for the movies that we're talking about today and stuff is basically, in some effect. I mean, this is kind of like a siege by diseases and stuff. We've talked before about kind of some of these siege movies, with John Carpenter's kind of love of that concept and stuff like that. So here in the 76 version, which by the way was shot in 20 days for $100,000. I mean, that's like kind of, even though like it's a good chunk of money back then, but still like kind of just, like probably relatively, like, I think in the relative budgets wise and stuff nowadays, I think it's like maybe only a couple million if that and stuff like that. So, so what struck me about this too is that, I mean, it's a relatively simple plot, but I think it kind of brings in some interesting ideas though, that like, from the beginning, we see these prisoners that are taken into the precinct as like kind of these subhumans. And then over time, we start seeing the humanity. And I think that was like something that like you rarely see in movies, like kind of this kind of transformation, if you will, because a lot of times when in most movies, when you see like kind of somebody who's like a prisoner or something, some of these kind of more or less stereotypes and stuff like that, they kind of more or less stay as, that kind of stereotype. Whereas in this one, because of how the plot moves things forward, you were kind of forced to like kind of get to know each of them. And of course, like the key one being Napoleon. I mean, that's the one that like, he really stood out, like kind of, like you kind of could tell he was charismatic from the beginning, but over time, he just really like, I mean, next to, of course, the main protagonist, the hero of Bishop and stuff, who's the central kind of character that we see from the beginning. Napoleon is the other one that kind of is, even though he's not a anti-hero, well, I guess maybe in some ways he is. I mean, I guess what are your thoughts about kind of his role in the movie and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's pretty much the star of the show for me, Napoleon Wilson. He's, the deadpan sarcasm with which he delivers most of his lines is just sort of perfect timing, perfect delivery. I mean, it's like one of those other weird, he's like Nancy Loomis, who's in this one and was in Halloween and The Fog, I can't remember his name now, Darwin Joston Joston or something. I can't remember his name, the guy who played Napoleon Wilson, but
Mm.
amazing actor. Really didn't do much after this. He played the Doctor in The Fog, and that was it. But I mean, he's just such a sort of like amazing, deadpan, sarcastic, tough guy character, and almost a throwback, I kind of think, to some of John Wayne's kind of performances. And the kind of like, you know, man of little words, but when they're either very funny or they hit home, or they kind of, you know, they don't mess, or he doesn't mince his words or anything like that. It's you know, it's very much that template. Also, I just wanted to say I was very impressed at how you segued from coronavirus to Assault on Precinct 13 there. It definitely feels like we're under siege. So yeah.
Definitely. And I think, you know, John Wayne's a really great, you know, comparison, because of the fact that, like, from what I understand, this was, you know, John Carpenter wanting to do a Western in a modern setting. That was really like kind of one of the driving factors for him and stuff. So you really had that feeling. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, what another movie that I don't know, you know, I didn't see anything to kind of refer to it, but I also had this sense of like that it was, to me, kind of like the Seven Samurai, where you had like kind of this combination of Western slash, you know, this mix of genres and stuff. And, you know, I feel like that was, you know, if it was not a conscious influence, it certainly had that feel to it, though, to me, that like, you know,
yeah, it was very conscious. Apparently, there's an interview with John Carpenter where he more or less based Assault on Precinct 13 on Rio Bravo, which is a John Wayne Western, also set in a prison where, you know, it's under siege. And I think there was at least another 2 other movies that Howard Hughes did with John Wayne that were almost exactly the same. And in fact, the third one, I think there's some famous quote where he calls up John Wayne and he says, "Do you want to see the script?" He's like, "It's all right. We've done this 2 times already. I'll be fine." So, yeah, I mean, I think very consciously it was Rio Bravo, but I think less consciously was the influence of Night of the Living Dead, because there's a lot of similarities to that as well. You know, I almost feel like this is a mixture of a Western and, well, Rio Bravo and Night of the Living Dead. And it was interesting you pointed out earlier about this idea of the subhuman death row prisoners who become more kind of human and individualistic. Well, you start to appreciate them as characters, where as opposed to the gangs, which are they're almost seen like zombies. They're in this case, it's not that they're kind of brain dead monsters. It's the fact that they're so under this sort of mind control of the gang mentality. They don't have any individual thought. So we're once again coming into this idea of like the 1970s, you know, individualism versus the lack of it, and how, you know, dangerous the lack of individualism is, and how group thinking can affect things. So I think there's that sort of similarity with the zombie movies. And of course you've got a black protagonist like Night of the Living Dead, and there's people breaking in through windows. It kind of feels kind of you know, it kind of feels quite a lot like a zombie movie.
And I feel like this is where, like, I kind of mentioned about how we're going to see a lot of subversion of expectations and stuff. I feel like that's one of the first ones, was that, like, whereas we typically see, like, it would, you know, be like a white protagonist with, like, you know, just kind of like different, you know, probably some minorities that would be attacking stuff, and that would be the end of it stuff. But here we have, you know, like you said, a black protagonist. And although that, like, you know, you have Hispanic kind of, you know, gang members that are attacking stuff, you also have black. You also had, you know, like, kind of initially the one that was killed was a white, you know, like, kind of member of the gang and stuff. So that was interesting. And then what's kind of beyond that was the trigger of all this too. That, like, was another subverting of expectations, was killing a little girl, like, you know, for that matter, you know, Kim Richards, you know, like, kind of who's, you know, Disney kind of character extraordinaire. I mean, that was like kind of a shock right there.
Oh, totally. And it's still very shocking, that scene. And I mean, John Carpenter said he even regrets that, and he kind of wish he didn't do it. But I mean, it's so powerful. And this also ties back to some of the other movies we've seen, like Death Wish, of these sort of random acts of violence that was clearly on the surface of people's thought in the 70s, of this fear of, like, you could literally get attacked or something could happen to you very randomly,
or
which
your
is
kids.
something or your kids. And I mean, this one is just horrendous.
I mean, that I can't think of many movies that would go there. You know, like, kind of that.
That's very extreme. And of course, I mean, I think what's also great in a way about such a horrible thing to happen is that, you know, the father's motivation. And I should point out, of course, as always, massive spoilers for this movie and the remake, because we will probably go into all the twists and everything else. But yeah, the father's behavior is really, really, you know, it's very Old Testament, completely, you know, you're completely sympathizing with him. You just want to kind of get the bastard, and then he just completely breaks down, which I think is probably quite realistic. You know, I think that's probably what would happen to you.
I was going to say that, like, on the one hand, it's strange that, like, you know, he's pretty much shuts down, like you said, but at the same time, though, it is probably, like you said, also more realistic and everything. I mean, to me, like, you know, here it felt like that, like, we would see more of him, if not get killed at least, or just something. But, like, he basically is just comatose for the rest of the movie, which I thought that was, like, that was in a sense some subverting of expectations, because I guess I just had this expectation that, like, he would be joining the fight, or if nothing else, like, kind of just, you know, finally end up getting killed, you know, because he, just was more or less a bystander throughout the kind of movie and stuff like that. So that, to me, like, kind of subverted that expectation.
Absolutely, yeah. You really don't see that very often. And I think as well, there's also this point that I don't know if he's trying to make it. It's almost like the kind of violence and what happens as a result of it. You know, the gang are there trying to take revenge on the six that get sort of fairly shot by the anonymous police force that just seem to gun them down. Then that switches to, like, the anonymous gang members, and it's the police that you're sort of getting to know. So they kind of switch that almost in roles, but it's this idea of, like, the violence begets more violence, and when you're in a state of revenge, you know, you're thinking on a kind of a very, maybe an animalistic, almost, you know, reptile like part of your brain that's just like, get this done, and, you know, not actually having to think about your actions. I don't know if that's one of the points he's trying to make, maybe.
And speaking of revenge, you know, as we kind of mentioned, you know, Death Wish was, of course, one of the big ones where that was the, you know, key theme stuff. I feel like, you know, for me, some reason that, like, this movie really made me think of is that revenge is really for yourself, and it's more of like a selfish kind of desire, whereas justice is more for the greater good and stuff. And that's something, I guess, for some reason I hadn't thought of before, but for some reason that came out as a thought in this movie, because, you know, here we had the father kind of, you know, like, you know, trying to just get revenge on the daughter, and then that led to, like, this kind of cascading effect and stuff, you know, like you said, the revenge begetting revenge. Whereas justice, ideally, you know, if it's really done right, then it's kind of, you know, resolves things to some degree. I mean, maybe, you know, there's really no equity per se, or, like, kind of way to kind of, you know, like we have this image of, like, justice being kind of these scales and stuff. In reality, you know, like, kind of once a life is lost, as we've talked about before, there's really no real way to balance that stuff. But maybe at least to some degree, we can kind of, like, you know, put things at peace again and stuff. And I think that's maybe sometimes the best that justice can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, also, I was thinking in terms of, I think you're right. And I think that's what sort of, I don't know if it's a very hammered home point of, like, revenge doesn't necessarily bring you peace, because that's very much kind of in the father's role. Is he gets his, you know, they don't make you wait for that satisfaction of getting the guy that killed the kid, you know, but he's then, you know, out of the picture. But also going back to what you're saying about subverting expectations, another one that I kind of feel is interesting for this is, again, going back to the kind of the zombie movie theme, is that in zombie movies, you have a lot of the times where the characters are trying to figure out what's going on, what's the motivation of these things, what are they after, and then towards the end they realize, oh, they're just trying to kill us, and or maybe not towards the end, but, you know, that is their main motivation. And in this one, you've got these group of characters that don't really know why these gang members are coming to get them. They just know that it's something to do with this guy, you know, the father, and the motivation is always hidden from them. They really never understand it, but you as the viewer understand the motivation, and you know that what he's done is pretty hardcore, and you can see why they're doing it. But it's weird that is always kind of hidden from the characters, and he purposefully doesn't tell you. He doesn't let the father tell any of the other characters what's going on. So it adds to this kind of their whole sense of confusion, and what do you do in a situation like this? You know, you really kind of put yourself in their position and think, you know, who would I trust? Who would I not? You know, all of those kind of things that go through your head. It was very clever.
And speaking of which, that's something that like we don't really kind of know as well. Like kind of, you know, like that, like who can you trust? Like initially, of course, you know, it seems clear that like it's you know, there's the lieutenant, you know, Bishop and stuff like that, and then the other kind of police people and everything like that. But then, you know, like once they're starting to be attacked and everything, they have to more or less trust the prisoners to some degree. But even then, that like, okay, now that, you know, the prisoners have joined the fight, but you know, it's still kind of questionable as to whether, you know, like kind of, you know, who can you trust, right? Like which prisoner won't kind of just, you know, still run off, and we'll definitely see more of that in the sequel and stuff, or the remake rather. But in this case, like kind of, yeah, it's interesting how you know, we have a little bit of kind of the element from, you know, The Thing and stuff where, you know, who, you know, like kind of, you know, which of these others, like kind of, you know, people look like me, but he really is not on my side and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think it's almost, in a way, he's almost encapsulated some sort of mechanics of society a little bit, in that when you actually start to get, it's very easy to be confrontational and against someone that you don't know, but once they start getting know the prisoners, they're actually working with them, it's much, you know, there's much harder for them to even sort of have that confrontation. But I mean, it makes for some good dialogue when they are being confrontational, but
and entertaining dialogue too. I mean, I thought that some of the funniest parts were like when the one guy, like he just kept going, you know, Wells, like kept going on about like, you know, his luck and everything like that, and then he's like, you know, we're not going to do this in a vote, you know, and he does this kind of
potatoes. Potatoes.
Yeah.
That was just hilarious. That was, I mean, talk about sort of, I just did not expect to see in a gritty, you know, 1 minute, you know, a kid's being shot, the next minute you've got two death row inmates playing potatoes. It was yes, completely surreal. I mean, there were just lots of really cool touches like that all the way through. I mean, just Napoleon's like constantly asking, "Have you got a smoke?" And you know, it's just classic stuff.
So that's kind of why, for me, like one of the key ideas, you know, more or less is this thing of subverting expectations, because I feel like, you know, throughout this movie they really do it and stuff, and it really kind of, I mean, to me, like it would just be more or less like just a straight linear kind of, you know, people or you know, being attacked kind of thing and stuff like that. And whereas because of all these subversions and stuff, it constantly puts you on your toes, and then other times it just kind of really just becomes something more, you know, than just another, you know, another siege movie, or for that matter, like a copy of a Western and stuff.
Well, I think, I mean, it's probably easy for us to overlook this because there's been so many movies that have taken themes from this, but you know, even the idea of having a police station, a place where you would normally expect to be safe and be protected, being the place that's the source of the danger, was something that was probably pretty groundbreaking, and again, not what people were expecting at all. And like, I think you picked up on this as well in the notes you wrote, that silencers, you very rarely see like an armed force, except for maybe in a spy movie, where they've all got like silencers, and you know, there's gun battles that are in silence, which is also kind of very original. And I still really don't see anything like that.
I know.
Often.
And that's interesting that like you haven't really, you know, like you would think that like that'd be something that they would copy again and stuff like that, but yeah, it's something that like I don't remember seeing in any other movie, and it was something that like I definitely didn't expect. And I'm kind of wondering if some reason there was some production decision as to, you know, because sometimes some of this kind of stuff happens because like, you know, it was a, you know, to save on the budget, you know, like kind of rather than like kind of spending more money on what's it called, pyrotechnics or whatever and stuff.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because I mentioned like how well crafted I thought the fog was, and how he sort of told this wonderfully atmospheric tale. And then I watched another thing on it later, and it turned out that like he had to go back and reshoot loads of scenes to add more atmosphere because it just didn't work and stuff. So it just shows you how good he is. But yeah, I mean, it's really, and I think it adds to this kind of level of dread, in that, you know, you could walk out and people just mow you down with silences. It makes it even worse in a way. So
Yeah, that's a good point though too, because if you see like things there's loud explosions, all that kind of stuff, then it makes you kind of duck and all that kind of stuff. But if you're just like standing up and then like kind of suddenly kind of get knocked knocked over or something like that, that's probably in some ways like kind of even scarier. Like just because it's almost like the idea like kind of there's no warning and stuff like that. I think if anything,
Yeah.
that's partially like kind of in some of the spy movies that what makes it scary, right? That like somebody is stalking you and everything, because they could be doing it with a silencer and like you may never even hear the gunshot that gets you and everything like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, it adds the realism as well, which is sadly lacking from the remake. But well, not totally, not as bad as some of the others we've watched. But I mean, the fact that they hide the bodies, there's a lot of thought that's gone into how could you actually make this, a realistic premise, which I liked.
And then you kind of mentioned Nancy Loomis a little bit, and I guess I tell you like it just seems like she's like kind of the what's it called? I'm trying to think of the other guy, Sean Bean. She's kind of like the Sean Bean of John Carpenter. Where
yeah, right. Yeah, it's unfortunate, really, isn't it? It's yeah, but she's very good in this as well.
But it's just like she what's it called? I think it's like movies like 3 the Nancy Loomis 0 in terms of survival and stuff or scoreboard.
Right, yeah. It's I don't know. Yeah, it's maybe she just got fed up of being killed in movies and decided could do something else.
One other thing I did want to kind of mention though was this idea of the us versus them, and
yes,
it's the thing that like as we kind of touched on to some degree, like initially the prisoners are kind of considered them, but then just based on kind of just how things move forward and like that, the us versus them kind of really changes, because now also the prisoners are also us and stuff. And this is something that we've talked about before, like the ones that really stand out for me are like Last Man on Earth and of course Invasion of Body Snatchers, where that's a very kind of human dynamic that different times we see these others, right? The like whatever the others are, like kind of whether it's aliens, zombies, or in this case gang members and stuff. And it's kind of the funny dynamic that like at some point you can very much become one of them, like kind of if whether in the case we'll see the remake and stuff like that, that like the person kind of turns sides, or maybe in the beginning from the beginning was even part of them without us knowing and stuff like that.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Initially, the prisoners are kind of considered them, but then just based on kind of just how things move forward and like that, the us versus them kind of really changes, because now also the prisoners are also us and stuff. And this is something that we've talked about before, like the ones that really stand out for me are like Last Man on Earth and of course Invasion of Body Snatchers, where that's a very kind of human dynamic that different times we see these others, right? The like whatever the others are, like kind of whether it's aliens, zombies, or in this case gang members and stuff. And it's kind of the funny dynamic that like at some point you can very much become one of them, like kind of if whether in the case we'll see the remake and stuff like that, that like the person kind of turns sides, or maybe in the beginning from the beginning was even part of them without us knowing and stuff like that.
Well, I think in a way, in some respects, the core of this of the 76 version is a kind of a bit like a Western in a way, in that those characters with a moral code tend to survive, and those without, like Nancy Loomis's character, just kick the father out. She's dead, and even Wells, who wants to make a run for it, he gets it. Although he's not, he's more borderline, but still, it seems very much like you have to have a good moral code to survive in the movie.
Right.
So I think it's quite kind of traditional in that respect. One thing I wanted to ask about, because I'm maybe not too familiar, but one of the opening parts of the movie is that they're saying how they want to regain the guns that have been stolen by these gangs. Now, I didn't know, like, I know that gun control in the US did get tighter after JFK got shot,
Right.
but I wasn't sure, like, what the, whether the types of guns they were using, whether things have got, as they're sort of basically assault weapons, have they got, more lax, or was this a period of tighter control when this movie was made? I don't know, to be honest with you. I tried sort of finding out, but
yeah, there was a period, from what I understand. I mean, just overall gun control has very much changed over the years, because, like, initially, from what I understand, like, a lot of these vets, right, could come home from, like, these different world wars and Vietnam, whatever stuff, and just basically keep their weapons and everything. And that was just something that was just like an accepted norm, like to a point. And then the movie Heat actually references that, like, until that point, like, cops were pretty much very limited to the weapons that they had available to them and stuff. And then after that, subsequent to that, like, that's why we have, like, SWAT teams and kind of, like, pretty much the police being armed like military. And that was something that, like, just didn't happen until, like, they started seeing, like, kind of, the criminals having these heavy duty, weapons that, we kind of see somewhat. And again, we kind of mentioned about the silencers and stuff. That was just something that, like, you just didn't see, like, for a lot of, like, kind of probably, like, up to at a certain point. I couldn't even tell you what that point was and stuff, or kind of where it shifted, or when, or, like, what the historical kind of tipping point, if you will, is. But I do know that, like, there was a certain point that, like, there was less restrictions, that they weren't as, like, kind of, watching out for that kind of thing, where you had to, like, have if you had certain kind of weapons, you had to make sure to get the register and all that kind of stuff. I know that kind of at some point there started becoming more stringent and kind of tighter, gun control and stuff like that.
Yeah, apparently I don't know, from what I read, in 1986, I think they tightened up some of the laws as well. But
absolutely,
there must have been a period there. The other thing you were saying about us and them, and that made me kind of think as well, it's a little bit about sort of mistrust of the authorities, and this idea that, you're in a police station, but no one's going to come and help you.
Yeah.
Seems like a very kind of post-Vietnam kind of mistrust, this kind of shift of, like, military police being the vanguards of society, and turning into something that, like, they may not be there for you. I don't know if that's maybe reflected a little bit in the premise as well.
With that, and also how, after, like, the where, Kent State, where they shot, like, protesters and stuff, there was just a lot more mistrust of the police and everything. And I don't know if that's kind of, like I said, if that's one of the things that he's reflecting and stuff. I feel like, we'll get into that pretty soon with the remake and everything, but I feel like people have been a lot more cynical about the police in, more recent history and stuff. Because up to then, right, if you watch, like, a lot of the older kind of police shows and stuff, they're just basically, like, except for the occasional corrupt cop and everything like that, we didn't have this idea, like, where corruption was as institutionalized, like, kind of, or that, like, you just kind of were expected more to kind of trust police. And then, like, over time, we became more and more cynical. And I feel like, like, this is probably a good segue into, the 2005 remake and stuff. The first thing we see, of course, is, like, this kind of subverting of expectations, where we have a role reversal between Napoleon and Bishop. Whereas now Napoleon is this, white cop and stuff like that, who's a sergeant for that matter. And Bishop now, as played by Laurence Fishburne, is the criminal and everything.
Yeah, I kind of some very obvious kind of movie kind of things that made me kind of roll my eyes. In that, he's the tough ex-Marine, who drinks whiskey when he wakes up and's got a dog, and whereas he's smart because he does crosswords,
Right.
He's black, but he's also atheist, and he reads Greek philosophy. So it was kind of, he's like a bad Morpheus from the Matrix, you know. It just kind of felt a little bit like, look at these two crazy characters, see how they're not like each other. It was, I don't know, yeah, how I can describe it. But
I guess for me, like, I actually found it like more interesting that they did subvert it, like, because of the fact, like, I think, you know, they would think that, you know, as we talk about different times with movies, that you know, part of the audience is the fans of the originals, and so if they do something fresher, it does kind of, like, you know, make it where it's something that kind of keeps them interested and stuff. So because, you know, like, the worst extreme case, like, two extreme cases. One is, we've talked about before already, is Dirty Dancer, where they do a shot by shot remake, and it's like, why? What was the point? Like, kind of, not only do you not rise close to the original, but you're kind of like, you know, like, this, it's almost like kind of pointless to kind of just, you know, it's, to me, like, it's almost like a school play, but, you know, with a huge budget thrown in and stuff, you know, like,
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
The other one, of course, was Psycho, where we haven't talked about that yet, but we will. That, like, apparently that's another shot-by-shot remake, except, you know, like, in this case, you have a performance that's, like, nowhere near, you know, Anthony Perkins and stuff. And so, again, what's the point and stuff? So I feel like with this remake, at least, they gave you some surprises, and I feel like the surprises had a point. You know, granted,
Yeah.
in the end, like, kind of, there's the different flaws you mentioned and stuff, but I felt like they did it where the rest of the story kind of had surprises and twists and everything like that. So in other words, even though if it was, like, not exactly done the best and stuff, and a lot of cliches and stuff, but at least there was a point to it, you know, like that.
Yeah, no. I mean, actually, to be fair, this was definitely one of the better remakes we saw, because it had pretty good acting. Maybe not Ja Rule, but, you know, it had some good actors, and it had some good subversions, and there were some interesting twists here and there, and the whole sort of premise was a slightly different one. But yeah, I mean, it kind of, it's still, I mean, my main gripe was, like, this whole message of, like, the police aren't coming, you know, we're in Detroit, you know, it could, you know, things could go horribly wrong for you, and turn down the wrong alley. So it's shown in the first bit where his team gets shot, but yet Laurence Fishburne seems to get caught by the police in a matter of seconds after he commits a crime. It's like, well, there's a little inconsistent there. But yeah, I thought the change of locale was interesting, and I thought the fact that they made it more of a, you know, like you were saying earlier about the mistrust of authorities turns into a more conspiratorial kind of mindset, and that's what we've got with this one is, you know, the police now as an organization can't be trusted because of the corruption.
Yeah,
so that was an interesting take on it, I thought. Yeah.
So yeah, major spoiler kind of there, that, like, you know, whereas, you know, before we had the gang members and stuff, you know, here we had the police that are actually going after them, and I felt that was actually, I thought that was, like, a really interesting twist and stuff. And again, I feel like, you know, despite, you know, kind of some of the other flaws and stuff, that I thought was done well, and where again we have Gabriel Byrne, you know, from Point of No Return and stuff like that, playing an authority who's a corrupt or dirty cop kind of character and stuff. He seems to kind of be I don't know, more or less kind of being typecast, I guess, into that role.
Evil, manipulative mastermind kind of character. I mean, it was the funny thing was, ever since seeing him in Point of No Return, I find it for some reason very hard to take him seriously now. And as soon as he came on, I was just laughing for some reason. I don't know why. But I mean, as soon as he was on the scene, I was just like, well, yeah, obviously he's the corrupt guy.
Right.
And likewise with sort of Brian Dennehy, because Brian Dennehy he mostly play, you know, he's a mixture. You can never quite tell with him as an actor, because sometimes he plays good guys, sometimes he doesn't. But when he just came in saying, well, you know what, guess what, guys, I'm retiring soon. I thought, well, clearly you're going to die, or you're going to betray someone very soon. So that was kind of, a bit obvious from that perspective.
I mean, that's definitely one kind of strong part about this movie, though, which kind of surprising that, like, it didn't perform as well, because I mean, other than Brian Dennehy, Laurence Fishburne, we already mentioned stuff like that. You had Ethan Hawke as the kind of lead character and stuff. You had John Leguizamo as one of the kind of prisoners initially and stuff. Dre Mateo from The Sopranos, kind of as being the attractive secretary and stuff like that, was like kind of. I didn't really expect her to be in this, but I thought she did a okay job and stuff. And then Maria Bello, that was kind of like an interesting. So she plays the psychiatrist in this one, and what's interesting is that like she's kind of representing the Nancy Loomis's role. So for me, like the expectation was okay. I pretty much thought like I'm going to expect her to die and stuff like that, and I thought what was done well was the fact that like they didn't do that initially, and you didn't. I didn't feel like it was you saw it coming until the very end. And again, major spoiler and stuff. But I felt like because of how they portrayed her character, I actually cared more than Nancy Loomis. Like in other words, Nancy Loomis, definitely. I felt like was a throwaway character, but this one, you felt like there was more this kind of dynamic between her and Ethan Hawke's character stuff, and that it was. You felt like there was some possibility that they might, kind of maybe end up together and stuff. There was some chemistry where they were bantering and all that, and I felt like in some degree that her death was a little bit more tragic because of the fact that like she did redeem herself by doing some heroic things and stuff. She wasn't just the kind of shrieking, kind of heroine and stuff.
Well, I thought that was actually one of the most interesting things about the movie was the fact that they set her up as the kind of the love interest, and then they have her surviving a car crash,
right,
taken hostage. And I thought, well, this is a cheesy kind of Hollywood remake, they're just going to let her survive. And I thought, wow, why would she have survived? And then they kill her immediately afterwards. So that was, completely subverted my expectations. I was just like, oh, okay, this is a bit more interesting than I thought. But I mean, the thing that made me laugh about that, I mean, I found the fact that she was reciting her own OCD out loud, just randomly to herself, was kind of a bit irritating. But also the fact that, she was there, trying to help him deal with his past. And he's there kind of doing this banter like, you just come down here because you fancy me. And you're not really interested in this psychotherapy stuff. And then she just reels off exactly what's wrong with him. And rather than him staying in character or being that, he's just like, well, actually, you've got a point there.
Right.
Do you want a medal? And that just really made me laugh. They set him up as having such sort of like, ego and everything else. And,
right.
But he just folded very, very quickly, which was a bit strange to watch. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Ethan Hawke, I think, did fine his performance, but I think the character, though, I almost feel like, I don't know, like in some ways, even though that they did have the thing of him like kind of going through this where he had to reface like kind of his demon of the fact that like he got his team killed and stuff like that. But I mean, other than that, I didn't feel like again, not anything on his performance, but I felt like his character was just not as strong as it could have been. Like kind of I mean, I feel like it just it only got so developed, and then the kind of like then he was like kind of like the default figurehead, right, and stuff, and that was really it. That like it was a lot of him. Again, it's based, I think, more on the writing. That like it was a lot of him like kind of going through the motions of the trying to pull people together and so on.
I think you've hit on it there. That's exactly how I would describe this movie. Is that, like very good actors with good performances with a script that is absolutely terrible. I mean, the dialogue was completely uninspired. Most of the time it was people just sort of swearing at each other, and there was no kind of wit, no kind of real complex personalities. I mean, I think most of the complexity in the personalities was brought through from the performances rather than the writing. Because when you actually listen to what there's, it was just like, hey, mother, this, and it was just like, they're bad guy, they're bad asses because they swear a lot, but there was no real kind of complexity to what they were saying at all. And I would say that this is a good indication of good actors with a bad script can still make quite a good movie. Bad actors like Ja Rule with a bad script does not a good movie make. And the fact that he kept referring to himself in the third person as Smiley
Right,
And
right.
like, I was just like, oh, don't do this to Ja Rule. Just give him something straightforward. Don't give him something that's kind of trying to be quirky and like he can figure out she's an Aries. You know, sorry, it's not gonna sell me on that one. So yeah, I just didn't really. And John, like Leguizamo, yeah.
Yeah.
I felt he was trying so hard to be like the quirky kind of junkie guy. And I mean, he obviously he acted really hard, but I don't think he was given anything particularly inspiring to work with. I think he did the best with what he was given, but and he certainly made the character memorable. But I mean, it was hard work.
Yeah, I think definitely. I'm trying to think of some of the other things I've seen in him that are stronger and stuff, but he's definitely like, and I think that's what's interesting as well, is that sometimes if you've seen these actors in other movies, kind of just shine a lot more. Like you said, that's really kind of shows more about how the writing was on this one than it was, on the individual's performance and stuff. So, yeah.
I think it's a shame because I think there were some good ideas in it. I really love the fact that it subverted your expectations several times. The twist was pretty good. If they hadn't have said he was retiring, I would have been none the wiser. It would have actually been really effective because they set up that kind of, he's an old cop with his moral code. And yeah, I mean, I just think why put the foreshadowing in? Do you really need it? Maybe they would have got flack for not having the foreshadowing if you didn't have him retiring, but yeah. Overall though, it just kind of felt it lacked charm. I think some interesting ideas, but it didn't have any other real, not like a classic character like Napoleon Wilson in it.
Well, that's a great point then, or the thing to kind of go back to in this case is, so other than, like what we talked about the writing and stuff, I don't know, like what other things like kind of could have been a lot better. I think that's really it. I mean, that's really the essence of why, despite, kind of that they did good job of, subverting expectations, but the execution with the writing, kind of really left a lot to be desired. And, like certainly they had great, the way they shot action sequences was all exciting. And, there was a lot there, like kind of, a lot of good stuff. But then in the end, I guess what's interesting is that like the core of things that in terms of, like you said, the dialogue, in terms of, other kind of writing aspects and stuff, that's really kind of where things fell short. Because certainly the performances were there as well. So I don't know. I guess that's really it in the end.
I can tell you two things that would have stuck the landing a little bit more for me. Would have been this idea that, Gabriel Byrne is so high up in the chain that even if you arrested him, they may not believe that he was actually in the right. And I think they could have played with that idea a little bit more. Like you could have thought the movie was over, but then, he has to still kind of somehow get people to realize that this wasn't just, Bishop taking everybody out. And it was, there was actually, they still find some way to, actually clearly lay the blame on the captain. Also as well, they kept talking about, we've got to call in the, whatever it was, the MRK or something, which was just a helicopter. It was kind of, that seemed a bit pointless. It was just like, well, why do you need a helicopter? You've got like the entire police force on your side, just go in and get them, It was like we were waiting like hours and hours for a SWAT team to turn up, and that seemed weird.
Yeah, I think that was creating the artificial, because one of the constraints, like kind of from the original was the fact that like, they had to make it to sun up. So then that way, like the cavalry was going to arrive, in which case it did in that movie and stuff. So in this case, I think they needed something like that of like kind of, why the people inside had to survive to daylight and stuff. And I think doing that was like kind of, because I think, like with the snowstorm, it was going to keep snowing. So like they had to kind of do something to kind of put some kind of time constraint, I guess. And I think that was the only thing they could come up with, was like kind of this thing that was coming that was going to make things even worse rather than make things better and stuff. So I think that was like kind of their solution in that case.
Yeah. I think as well, it was kind of, I mean, what I did like about it was this whole idea of using phone jammers. Because a bit like a bit like the silences in the original, that kind of technical thing actually subverted your expectations. Because I didn't even know about phone jammers, and I watched this and I was just like, what? You can block like people's mobile phones, and I didn't. And you can actually do that for quite a few miles. And it's like, why has this never been used in a horror movie before? Or not one that I've seen. So yeah, that was really good that they you know, that modern sort of plot hole, they managed to fill that pretty well actually. But I still think it looked so enclosed, that police station. It wasn't like in the one in LA where it's kind of spread out and then the streets. This felt like this was right in the middle of the. And if you're going to be going outside and shooting a gun without a silencer, pretty certain some police would turn up at some point. So it lost quite a bit, you know, a bit of its sort of realism and premise. But I suppose you've got to kind of say the same with the original there. You can't really fault it too much for that. So but yeah.
Any other kind of thoughts about like you know, like the things that really could have worked at, like, you know, other lost opportunities, I guess, with the remake?
I haven't really got any more thoughts on how you could fix it, to be honest. But I will say something we haven't touched on is the music. Which in, you know, the John Carpenter theme for Assault on Precinct 13 is definitely one of his best. I think after Halloween, or maybe even as good as Halloween when it comes to John Carpenter themes. And also, I should point out, ripped off by Africa Bambaataa, with Bambaataa's theme in 1986, I think. And then again by Bomb the Bass with their track Mega Blast. And then again with the video game Xenon 2 Mega Blast, which used a version of the Bomb the Bass track. So it's been heavily reused, that one. And also, maybe not on quite such a sort of praiseworthy note, but the KRS-One track at the end of the remake I found pretty hilarious, because it seems to be just KRS-One telling you the movie back to you in rap form.
Oh, really?
Which, yeah, if you actually listen to it, it's really quite funny. It's just like, yeah, I'm going to be like Ethan Hawke, and then I'm like Laurence Fishburne, and
interesting.
And you know, on Precinct 13. And the thing is, I mean, you know, KRS-One, he's a legendary rapper. You know, gotta love those old Boogie Down productions and things like this from the 80s. But yeah, this was not his best moment, and I just thought as a concept it was just a very funny idea for a track, that you just recount everything that happened in the movie in a rap. But yeah.
So coming up, let's see, I guess we still have of course Manhunter and Red Dragon with
yes.
I don't know if we're ready to announce the special guest yet. We'll kind of hold off a little bit longer and stuff.
Yeah.
And then you know, like some of the other ones we've been thinking about is, of course, you know, the Lone Wolf and Cub, and how that's been transformed into, of course, more recently, The Mandalorian, and then, you know, before that, Road to Perdition. I'm actually, the more I kind of, you know, think about that one, it's kind of really excites me because of the fact that, like, you know, these movies that, like, you know, have these space themes or sci-fi themes and stuff, having a basis in, you know, the Japanese samurai culture. That's actually one of those things that I have to admit that a personal weakness of mine is that, like, I just, it's probably like a lot of Japanese movies that I really like, especially the samurai and stuff like that, setting and all that. And that was definitely another thing that for me, like, kind of sold me on Westworld and the season 2 and stuff. So speaking of which, that's the thing that, like, we may be covering in a bit. In fact, I'm pretty sure we will, is revisiting Westworld from the perspective of, here we are in season 3 and how they're kind of going into the outside world. And I thought that was a great idea, though, about kind of possibly looking at, I think it's Future World, that, like, was the original sequel that kind of first broached that idea. So yeah, that definitely will be another one coming up. So
yeah, looking forward to it.
And so as always, be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds, and we'll catch you next time. On this last night, a police precinct is shutting down. Okay. On its last night, a police precinct is getting ready to shut down when it's suddenly attacked. That's the story of assault on precinct 6. I'm getting tongue-tied.